My college roommate told everyone I'd end up working retail forever. She had no idea I was the silent investor behind the startup that just rejected her pitch. In college, my roommate Bianca was the golden one. Business school, internships at firms with names everyone recognized, the kind of confidence that walked into every room assuming it belonged there. I studied literature, worked part-time at a bookstore, and had absolutely no idea, most days, what I wanted to do with my life. Bianca found that endlessly amusing. "You're going to end up working retail forever," she told me once, not unkindly exactly, more like a simple observation she found mildly entertaining, the way you'd comment on weather. Some people just aren't built for real ambition. I laughed it off at the time, mostly because at 19, I didn't have the language yet to explain that ambition doesn't always look like a business degree and a 5-year plan typed up in a binder. We stayed loosely in touch after graduation, the way college roommates do, mutual friends' weddings, occasional birthday messages, the kind of relationship that exists more out of shared history than actual closeness. Bianca went into corporate strategy, then private equity, building exactly the career trajectory she'd always narrated for herself. I took a winding path that looked, from the outside, considerably less impressive, a few years in publishing, then marketing for small businesses, then, quietly, angel investing, after an inheritance from my grandmother gave me enough capital to start learning an entirely different skill set in my late 20s. I was careful about it, methodical in a way that had nothing to do with the confident, loud ambition Bianca had always modeled. I read everything I could about early-stage investing, made small mistakes with small amounts of money, and slowly built relationships with founders and other investors who valued careful, quiet due diligence over flashy conviction. By my mid-30s, I'd become a fairly consistent, if publicly invisible, presence in a handful of consumer product startups, the kind of investor whose name rarely appeared in press releases because I preferred structuring my involvement through a small investment fund rather than my own name. Bianca, as far as I knew, still believed I worked in marketing, or something like that. We hadn't discussed careers in any real depth for years. Our conversations, on the rare occasions we had them, stayed comfortably shallow, the way conversations do with people you're fond of in memory but no longer actually know. The moment everything changed happened almost by accident, at a mutual friend's engagement party 18 months ago. Bianca, several drinks in, was telling a small group about a startup pitch she'd recently made, some sustainable packaging company she'd been advising and had personally invested her own money into, only to be, in her words, rejected by some overly cautious fund that clearly didn't understand the market opportunity. She named the fund. I recognized it immediately, because it was mine. I didn't say anything that night, partly because it felt like an unnecessarily dramatic moment to bring up at someone else's engagement party, and partly because I genuinely wanted to understand the situation better before saying anything at all. The next morning, I pulled the actual investment memo our team had prepared on that packaging startup, the one Bianca had pitched us on behalf of, and reviewed exactly why we'd passed. It wasn't personal, and it certainly wasn't a lack of understanding the market. Our team had passed because the startup's unit economics didn't hold up under any realistic growth scenario, a concern 3 separate analysts had flagged independently, well before Bianca's name ever appeared in the pitch deck. It was a sound, careful decision, the kind of decision my fund had built its entire reputation on making. I reached out to Bianca directly a few weeks later, not to embarrass her, but because something about the situation felt like it deserved an honest conversation rather than continued silence. I told her, plainly, that I was aware of the pitch, and that I was, in fact, one of the managing partners of the fund that had passed on it. She was quiet for a long moment on the phone. Then she asked, carefully, if I was joking. I wasn't. I explained, without any triumph in my voice, that I'd built the fund slowly over almost a decade, starting with a modest inheritance and an enormous amount of unglamorous, quiet learning, the kind of ambition that doesn't announce itself at 19 with a business degree and a 5-year plan, but builds itself methodically, in rooms nobody's watching. Bianca asked me, eventually, why I'd never mentioned any of it before, across all our years of loosely staying in touch. I told her the truth. She'd decided, back in college, exactly what kind of future I was capable of, and for a long time, Correcting that story felt like more effort than it was worth, especially with someone who'd never actually asked a real question about my life in over a decade. To Bianca's credit, she didn't get defensive, not really. She asked, quietly, if I'd be willing to look at her packaging startup's numbers again, honestly, not as a favor, but as someone who clearly understood the space better than she'd assumed. I agreed, and over several conversations, walked her through exactly where the unit economics fell apart and what a more sustainable path might actually look like. She restructured the business model over the following months, addressing almost every concern our original memo had raised. 6 months later, her revised pitch came back across my fund's desk, this time through the normal deal flow, without either of us mentioning our history to the investment committee. It was, genuinely, a much stronger business than her original pitch had been. We invested, not because of who Bianca was to me personally, but because the numbers, this time, actually held up. Bianca still occasionally jokes, a little more carefully now, about how she used to tell people I'd end up working retail forever. I don't hold on to it with any real anger. People form early opinions about who deserves ambition and who doesn't, often based on nothing more than confidence, credentials, or the particular shape someone's 20s happen to take. It took Bianca almost 15 years to learn that quiet, methodical building can look, from the outside, exactly like having no real plan at all, right up until the moment it very clearly isn't. If you've ever been the person someone decided, early and confidently, wasn't built for real ambition, remember this: ambition doesn't always look loud, credentialed, or immediately visible. Sometimes it looks like a decade of careful, unglamorous learning, quietly building something real, long after everyone else has already decided your story. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Silent Empire. New story every week, subscribe so you never miss one. See you in the next one.